Guys, have you ever been around somebody that just feels a little bit off? Like, that kid in high school or maybe even in middle school that everybody picked on because their body language is a little bit off. They were schlubbing over, they were picking their nose, they were scratching their butt, they were doing this and this, and they just weren't able to really make friends or do anything because their body language was just off. Maybe they didn't even say dumb things, but they just moved funny, so you didn't want anything to do with them, right? So let's teach you guys a couple basic lessons on body language here today. Now that I'm done messing up mine, right? So we'll start off with, when we're speaking about logic, typically we want to lean back a little bit, right? Because it's obvious, it's logical. What we're telling our prospect is, I can save you X amount of money on processing and blah, 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 right? Tonality's off, but we're speaking about logic. And when we're speaking about something emotional, we want to lean into emotion and we want to lean back for logic. Yeah, because it's obvious. Everybody knows that. John, let me tell you, you're going to be very, very impressed, right? Because we're trying to invoke their limbic brain and their logic. We're trying to invoke the prefrontal cortex psychologically for the sale. We want to lean back. We want to put our chest up. This is factual, right? So we want to work on these couple things. Now, in payment processing, one of my favorite hand gestures to use as, somebody who's been a closer in payment processing for years now is this right here, right? John, we want to find the gaps in your processing and bring them down, right? So we're bringing down your gaps in your processing. You might have a lot of gaps in your processing. We just want to find those and we want to cancel those out. So whatever your language pattern is, make sure that you have the proper hand gestures to go along with that language pattern, right? So when you're talking about logical things, you might be opening up and leaning back a little bit. And you're opening up your hands because it's obvious you're opening up for information versus coming in to tell a secret. You have a little bit more closed body language because you don't want everybody to hear it. It's a little secret between me and you're a little bit uncomfortable. So you're coming together a little bit because you don't want everybody else to hear, right? So make sure that you're using these little tips and tricks. Now, have you ever been to like a trade show where you could tell who the richest guy in the room or the most influential guy in the room was literally right away? They didn't say a word though, right? Like you saw them from 100 yards away across the room, and you're like, "Who is that?" And it's this person. They're just walking a certain way. They're talking a certain way. They're shaking everybody's hand a certain way. You notice that because we've been conditioned since we were this big to pick out what success looks like, to pick out what a winner looks like, right? So we've been preconditioned to understand what these motions and movements are. Now, those motions and movements are slightly different for every industry, just like the attire is slightly different for every industry. So we want to make sure that we're dressing appropriately, and it's the law of congruency. You want to dress as you're expected to dress by your clients or your prospects whose doors you're going to be walking through. Like I said, you don't want to show up as a plumber in a three-piece suit. You'll look like a complete idiot. So you don't want to do that, but you also don't want to look like a complete schlub, right? You don't want to have your tool belt hanging off your butt with your butt crack out and all these other things. Those are not things that we want to do. You want to be somewhere in between. You don't want to show up in the $200,000 truck because that's a little bit too much for a plumber, right? But you also don't want to be showing up with the bumper hanging off and looking like a slob because no one wants to deal with a slob either. So we need to find out, the middle ground in between these things. And what you need to do is find an expert in your field, and this is important, in your area, because how people dress in Miami versus how people dress in Boston for success is a completely different story. Miami attire is just not appropriate in Boston. If you show up to a meeting in Boston with spiky Christian Louboutins on, I guarantee you they're going to think you're a bunch of clowns. But if you walk into a Miami meeting with those same shoes on, you're going to get 10 compliments on those things. Oh man, the new Louboutins, those things are great. Oh yeah, let's go party later, right? Completely different culture, completely different attire. It's really different everything. So we want to make sure that we have the law of congruency in our favor. We want to make sure that we're dressing like an expert. So find a local expert in your area, in the business, go to the trade show. Find that guy who just stands out. Find that guy who is doing $12 billion a year in business in the payments processing business, and go seek that person out and go look at them, watch how they move, watch how they act, right? So you're going to be using your body position, your hand gestures, and also you want to mirror your client. Like when we say match and mirror, if your client is like, a person who's really like slouched over a little bit all the time, you don't want to be somebody who's like way back here, right? Because they want to perceive you as they perceive themselves. People buy from those who they like, they trust, or they perceive to be like themselves. So you want to try to come off a little bit that way. So we're using those psychological underpinnings of these psychological factors to make sure that we're building rapport with that client through matching and mirroring. You'll notice when you're in rapport with someone, keep track of it next time you're with one of your absolute best friends. If they sit back and they cross their leg right over left, check it out. In about 3 minutes, I bet you'll end up crossing your leg subconsciously without even knowing it. Why is that? Because you're in rapport with that person. So when you're in a sales meeting, you're not necessarily just going to, cross your leg 1 second later and make it completely obvious that you're doing that. But you might wait, 15, 30 seconds and then match that person's body language. That'll make them feel like you're in a little bit better rapport. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's not. Keep it all intact. Make sure that you're keeping all these factors in your mind. Make sure you're keeping these psychological factors in mind, and make sure you're crushing your sales. Thank you guys for listening. On to the next module.